Now I'd like to welcome our first speaker. His name is James Rubel. James is going to share how growing up on the shores of Lake Erie, one of our Great Lakes, he discovered the natural and cultural riches of the Great Lakes and other aquatic habitats. His passion then fueled his career as he now coordinates the largest single-day beach cleanup in Washington. It's pretty impressive. So if you're interested in a future job where you get to work with others to conserve and care for the beaches that we love, be sure to listen up. So James, you can go ahead and start your video, and Kate, you can start sharing your screen and his presentation.
Wonderful. Hi guys. Thank you for having me. My name is James Rubel. Thank you for the introduction there, Lindsay. It's so great to virtually meet everybody. As Lindsay said, my name is James Rubel. I'm the program coordinator for Washington Coast Savers and the Olympic Coast chapter of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. And I'm going to go ahead and give you guys just a brief background on how I got into this role that I'm currently in, and more about how my passion for the outdoors got me to where I am today. So next slide, please. So I started out, I grew up on Lake Erie in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, which is on the Great Lakes. And not sure if any of you guys have spent time on the Great Lakes, but they really do feel like the ocean when you're there. You look out and you just see water out in the distance. And so I eventually went to Ohio State for natural resource management and administration. And that's located in Columbus, Ohio, which is in the middle of the state. And I was feeling pretty landlocked and wanted to get more involved in the water world again. So at the end of my career there at Ohio State, I was studying more policy and water law classes, and I became interested in more of the intersection between natural resource management and ocean marine sciences, and how we can apply and protect those special places with different laws and regulations and policies. So I found a great program at the University of Washington called the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs. And that's where I got my graduate degree and graduated in 2018 during the early spring. So next slide, please. And I started out my career and started out my career at the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center, starting out actually as a volunteer, and then I became more involved in their education and outreach team, doing different wildlife rehabilitation and education and outreach programs with various school groups who came through the Nature Center, and we did a lot of different wildlife rehabilitation on owls, on sea turtles, on seagulls, on all sorts of different amphibians and reptiles, and it was really, really fun. So following that, my first paid position at Ohio State was with the Bird Polar and Climate Research Center, and they are focused on studying Earth's climate's pass through ice cores. And so their research teams go all throughout the world, and they climb really high mountains like in the Himalayas and all over Asia, South America, Africa, and the Arctic and polar regions as well. So they are looking for how they can study different dust particles and these different ice cores that reveal kind of what the temperatures and what the atmosphere was looking like in the past. And so it was my job there to do more education and outreach with different school groups, and working in the Polar Rock Repository, looking at different fossils collected from Antarctica. And then next slide, please. From there, after when I moved to Seattle then for grad school, I was an intern at Seattle Housing Authority, organizing environmental stewardship programs for low-income residents. And they got to design the programs themselves, which was really important. And we were learning more about water quality and waste management. And then from there, I was a research assistant at the Institute for Hazard Mitigation and Planning Research, focusing on coastal erosion and coastal floods and how that's affecting Washington. And then my first job out of grad school and where I'm still at, so it's been a good 2.5 years now with the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary Foundation and Washington Coast Savers. So I'll get into those in the next slides here. Washington Coast Savers is an alliance of different partners and volunteers who are dedicated to keeping the state's beaches clean of marine debris through coordinated beach cleanups and education and prevention efforts. So Washington Coast Savers really is an alliance of various different partners, various partners from federal and state agencies. And if you go to the next slide, you can see those, please. Yeah, thank you. You can see we work closely with the National Park Service, with Washington State Parks and Recreation Commission, with the NOAA Marine Debris Program, with Washington Sea Grant, and then closely with nonprofits as well, such as Surfrider Foundation and the Ocean Conservancy. And we work very closely with the 4 coastal treaty tribes in Washington, so the Makah, Quileute, Quinault, and Hoh tribes. And we work with all of these various landowners who give their liability to our volunteers who come out annually to clean our beaches. So our beaches are cleaned 3 times throughout the year by our volunteers. And I will show you a map here soon, but so the Alliance cleans over 60 beaches 3 times a year. So for the Earth Day cleanup, which takes place in April of each year, which is the Washington Coast cleanup. And then we do a 5th of July cleanup, and we are the regional coordinators for Ocean Conservancy's International Coastal Cleanup, which takes place on the 3rd weekend of September each year. And then if you go to the next slide, my role, the other hat of my role is with the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary. Not sure how familiar you folks are with the National Marine Sanctuary system, but it's out of NOAA, and we have 14 National Marine Sanctuaries in the US, and they're marine protected areas. They're kind of, I like to describe them as kind of like national parks of the ocean. So there's certain restrictions with fishing and shipping to really just protect critical habitat. And they're designated through the National Marine Sanctuaries Act through Congress. And what's something that's really cool about it is that it's all community based. So the community around Olympic Coast decided to come together in the early 90s and designate it as a culturally and ecologically important area that deserves protection. So it's 3,000 square miles of protected waters off of the shorelines, starting from Neah Bay in the northern end by the Makah Reservation and extending down to the Copalis River by Ocean Shores. Next slide, please. And Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary is a very, one of the most diverse ecosystems. As you guys know, similar to Oregon's coast, we have very nutrient-rich waters on and off of Washington's coast as well. So varying from, since it's 3,000 square miles, the beaches do vary from sandier in the southern areas, and then when you get more to the northern end of it, it's more rocky intertidal lives. And we have diverse kelp forests, deep sea reefs, and then of course the open ocean ecosystems as well. And something that I appreciate about the sanctuaries is when you're standing on the beach and looking out on the water, you can't really see, well, you don't see any large ships going by, and you don't see any dredging, and you don't see any of just human activity. So it's really just beautiful to be at these really diverse and remote areas and just really be in nature. You kind of just get a sense for how this area always was. And then of course we have over 20 marine mammals that travel throughout the sanctuary, including the beloved orca whales. And then we have a diverse range of different seabirds, fish, invertebrates, and microalgae. So next slide, please. Of course, the sanctuaries, there is our Tatoosh boat, our research vessel that the different scientists and mooring teams go out on and are monitoring ocean acidification and how the Olympic Coast is doing in comparison to previous years. And the program goals are really to promote the long-term conservation while allowing sustainable use to take place. So fishing is allowed, but of course, like deep sea fishing and dredging and harmful practices are not allowed. And the mission is really to protect these ecosystems and promote sustainability while also engaging the public in protecting these areas and trying to get them to care more about these underwater treasures. Next slide, please. And again, so something the sanctuaries monitors pretty regularly is oil spill prevention. There are less than 1,200 vessels that pass through it. And of course, shipping is critical for the various economic health of the state. And a lot of these shipping containers are coming through from the outer coast to Puget Sound to Seattle, and then down through Oregon as well, and going to through the Columbia River to Portland. And so it's just important that we have a sanctuary here and we're monitoring it closely to protect sensitive species and to really prevent oil spills. Next slide, please. And then, so switching gears again, then to go to Coast Savers. And I should back up and just say that for my role as the program coordinator, I have a steering committee of about 12 to 15 folks, kind of those folks that were in that logo soup slide earlier so we have a seat for the Olympic National Park, Washington State Parks, the tribes, Lions Club International, Surfrider Foundation, and then we have Citizen at Large. And it's my job, we meet regularly throughout the year to just discuss how we're gonna clean the beaches, what areas need more attention than others, how we can get the supplies to the volunteers. So this is a map of all the beaches that we clean. If you go to coastsavers.org and then go to the cleanups tab, you can see more closely which beaches, more about, like, you can learn where you can sign up, where there's camping, where there's free barbecues, what the tides are like. So everywhere from Long Beach up to Neah Bay, and then across the Strait of Juan de Fuca there to Port Townsend are areas that we're cleaning. And we have site coordinators there on the day of who are passing out supplies and materials and pointing the volunteers in the right direction to the dumpsters to safely dispose of the marine debris that they're collecting. Next slide, please. Marine debris defined, this is from NOAA's site, as any persistent solid material that's manufactured or processed, and it can directly or indirectly, unintentionally or unintentionally harm different marine environments and critters, and it's disposed of in these marine environments. So we have different categories. I'm sure you guys have heard some of these terms, such as single use, but we often see small, tiny fragments as well, and derelict fishing gear and ropes are very common on the Washington and Oregon coastline as well. Next slide, please. And this is obviously a problem because it causes a huge issue for not only vessel traffic and aesthetically clean beaches, but for wildlife and the health of our ecosystems. Over 100,000 marine mammals and up to 1 million seabirds will die every year after ingesting or being entangled in marine litter. And I actually visited Hawaii last December. Some of our partners at the Hawaii Papahana Visitor Center, and they were explaining how they saw a baby calf humpback whale travel from Washington's coastline down to Hawaii, and it was entangled in some derelict fishing gear. And they were thankfully able to safely save it, but it's just, yeah, I don't think folks always realize how far and how dangerous this this problem can really become. So next slide, please. Coast Savers goals are really the steering committee is run by these 4 main goals of protecting wildlife and habitat, maintaining the aesthetics of the beaches, which a lot of research from Surfrider has shown that Washington tourists and PNW tourists obviously prefer cleaner beaches, but that can actually turn back and give a lot of money back to local economies, and it helps local tourism as well. And then, of course, to encourage stewardship and conduct research, similar to what we're doing today, and then removing and identifying items that can cause harm for folks. Next slide, please. So last in March of 2019, I actually went to the Hatfield Marine Science Center in Oregon and went to the Oregon Marine Debris Action Plan workshop that the NOAA Marine Debris Program hosted. And so there are 11 of these marine debris action plans that NOAA has all throughout the US. Washington and Oregon each have their own action plans that various nonprofits and government groups and community groups are assigned different strategies to fulfill different goals, such as like removing marine debris and conducting beach cleanups with different volunteers and community groups. And so we are, Coast Savers is a part of the Marine Debris Action Plan, and we're meeting with all the partners for the first time since the plan was enacted in 2018 to review the goals in the next few weeks. So looking forward to that. And then next slide, please. So stewardship and restoration efforts are really important for Coast Savers and the Washington Clean Coast Alliance. And so here you can just see there's some high school groups there. That's the Youth Environmental Stewardship Teams from Fort Townsend in the top right corner there, removing one of the derelict vessels from, I believe that's around Nia Bay. And then we have some of our other long-term volunteers there in the other photos collecting some marine debris with their handy ingenuity. Sorry, I'm really bad at saying that word. But you can see they're there with their families, and it's always a community event, these cleanups. So oftentimes people come out with their children or their best friends, and we'll camp out on the coast and really just make it a whole weekend out of it. And we often try to incentivize volunteers with free camping or barbecues. Next slide, please. So our next cleanup will be in Earth Day for the Washington Coast Cleanup, which is the largest single day beach cleanup in the state. And we also will partner pretty closely with Oregon Solve. If you guys have heard of Solve, I'm sure some of you have, but if you're interested in getting more involved in beach cleanups in Oregon, I definitely recommend checking out Solve's website. And then next slide there, we often get asked, if there's age limits for volunteers to get involved. There's definitely not. We encourage everybody to get involved if they can. And next slide, as you guys can see, in the Pacific Northwest, we never know if we're going to get rainy weather like we are today, or some days we really luck out and we get nicer weather. So our volunteers are very hardy and dedicated folks and will always come out, which is great. So next slide. You can see we're doing more education and outreach. There's me on the right-hand side there at the Port Angeles Farmers Market. And then on the left-hand side, we have our traveling marine debris showcase there that goes around all along the Washington coast to different visitor centers for Olympic National Park and the state parks to just engage the public and teach them more about the dangers of marine debris and how they can dispose of their trash more efficiently. And then next slide, you can see more about our research and monitoring efforts. So we encourage folks to fill out debris data cards so we can closely monitor what items are becoming more and more of an issue on the Washington coast, and how we can closely identify those and try to create better policies that will stop the inflow of more marine debris on the coastlines. So next slide, you will see how our stewardship and restoration is still happening during COVID. We unfortunately had to cancel our Earth Day cleanup in April, but we're still, for the 5th of July International Coastal Cleanup, we were able to have reduced cleanups outside of the tribal and Olympic National Park federal lands that were closed to stop the spread of a pandemic from vulnerable coastal communities. But it's been really awesome to just see smaller groups go out and clean up their everyday backyard waterways as well. That's been something that's been motivating to me and been helping me get through these times that we're all going through right now. And then the next slide, you can see just for the 5th of July alone on 3 beaches this year, we collected close to 150,000 pounds of debris, firework debris. And I don't know why people love to celebrate the 5th of July or 4th of July by polluting our public lands and beaches, but it's something we're working closely with Zero Waste Washington and other groups to try to monitor firework debris and to stop the inflow of more of it from our coastal areas in Washington. And then the next slide you will see from our data trends from all of, since we've started collecting data in the early 2000s, we've collected close to 550 tons of debris, which if you're more of a pounds person, that's close to 1 million pounds, which is just really impressive that grassroots efforts and volunteers are doing all of this. And the next slide will show you more of the types of different debris that the volunteers are collecting. And this is from Olympic Coast, the National Marine Sanctuary Monitoring Program. And so no surprise, hard plastics and foam fragments are our biggest culprits in single use of debris items on the Washington coast. Those plastic water bottles are our #1 item, but then we have a lot of different derelict fishing gear and smaller film fragments and rubber as well. The next slide will show you more of how our regional and seasonal trends shift for debris. We see a lot of debris washing up during the winter months on the outer coast. And that is because of these intense winds and storms that we're experiencing. So we're getting into that right now. And so we will see more of that and more plastic being washed up from the currents and these winter storms on the beaches. And the next slide gets into kind of more of those modeling travel pathways and the ocean currents and how these, how if you have a really buoyant material like a plastic water bottle that's light, it will travel far distances over waves. And the next slide there gets into how we're all connected by the currents. And something that happened devastatingly in 2011 was the Japanese tsunami. And the next slide shows kind of the early arrivals that were happening on the Washington coast. We had more of those buoyant materials. And then in the next slide shows more later, we were seeing more of the large debris items washing up. So from Cape Disappointment State Park, we had a large skiff, and actually by Mosquito Creek, we had a huge dock piece that washed up in 2012. And something that's really great that some folks don't realize is the Japanese government actually donated a large portion of proceeds to the US government to help collect a lot of these materials and disseminate it to groups like Coast Savers through the NOAA Marine Debris Program and federal grant opportunities, which I just think is really impressive and generous considering that they had a lot of devastation that struck their own communities. And then the next slide really gets into more of those unique risks of this tsunami debris. Scientists were concerned with invasive species, navigation being disrupted to ships, and then of course containers of hazardous waste and radioactive materials being transported as well. And then the next slide gets more, these last slides get into our innovative solutions. So if you go to YouTube, I suggest watching this Million Waves partnership. Million Waves is a nonprofit based in Anacortes, Washington, and their whole mission is to take reclaimed ocean plastics and they actually turn it into 3D prosthetics. So this is Abby McPherson. She is from around the Seattle area, and she came out to our beach cleanup at Hobuck Beach for the International Coastal Cleanup in September of 2018, and was demonstrating how if you actually just collect one piece of plastic of a water bottle, it can create up to, I believe it's 11 digits, so digits as in fingers, for folks who have limb differences. So it's really, it was really amazing to just have the demonstration. They had a shredder on display that was showing how the different filament could create all of these these different prosthetics. It was a really fun day, and so we're still working on getting more of those materials to Million Waves so that can produce more of those. And then the next slide gets more into our partnership with Pac Westy. So if you're ever around Bainbridge Island or Seattle, suggest renting out one of our our vans, which we're hoping to turn into an electric van soon. But a portion of all proceeds go back to Coast Savers. And, for the PNW, we do get a lot of tourists who come out during the summer months. And so we always suggest folks to learn more about the sanctuary and the national park and the coast and how they can become better stewards and volunteer tourists, if you say, during those months. And then the last slide, if you check the Coast Savers website regularly, we always try to update it with different rethink activities for folks. So there we have our AmeriCorps member, Mel, which I highly suggest looking into the AmeriCorps programs for any folks who are interested in getting involved in this type of work. But Mel, she was doing an origami activity out of reusable materials there for different school groups. And then at the top there, we have our partner at Cloudoun County Waste Department teaching more about how folks can be more sustainable in their everyday lives and compost in their backyards. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. And please let me know. You can reach out to me there. My email is coordinator@coastsavers.org if you have any questions. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you, James. Thanks for giving us insight into the variety of different things that you can do working for Coast Savers. I know you wear multiple hats, but working for Coast Savers and for the National Marine Sanctuary. So it's really cool to get a insight into like the coordinator of conservation efforts, if you will. And so we have time for a few quick questions, but if we don't get your question, maybe James can type some answers to you during Kelsey's presentation. But one question is, what is the most interesting item you have found on the beach?
That's a great question. I always think the items that are really interesting are, we still are seeing items from Japan washing over and from overseas. So I found actually candy wrappers of Japanese inscriptions and Chinese writing also, from both countries. And yeah, I always just like to say, though, a lot of our debris from the US goes over to the other side too. So sometimes people like to point fingers, but we all need to be responsible and safely dispose of our items.
Fantastic. And you showed how there's data on where there's more debris at different times of year, at different locations. So do you use that data to then choose the best time of year to pinpoint cleanups at those different locations? So kind of combining, I know you do a lot of coordination, but for those of us that are data minded, you can kind of incorporate data collection into different positions. So if you can expand on that.
Yeah. So that is why the Earth Day cleanup takes place right after the winter months, is for to get to those really remote areas that, because debris's been washing up and collecting over the winter in catches, usually around like Shai in the northern Olympic Coast areas. So, excuse me. That is why we try to get folks out in the early springtime after those winter months.
Great, James. And we have one of our attendees asking how there's probably a lot of us that are not at the coast, right? And so you did a nice job of connecting that our waste can make it to the coast, to our oceans, no matter where we live. And so what would your advice be for someone who's inland, more inland? How can they help? How can they help out if they can't quite access the coast?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I always try to say this to my folks living in Ohio too. We're all connected eventually, every waterway will connect to the coast. So it's really important to, of course, know your local recycling ordinances, know what can be safely recycled, what can't be. But even more importantly, recycling is just a band-aid to the problem. It's important to compost if you can. And if your city does not take composting, you can definitely, there's tons of tutorial videos online to learn more about composting, but also reducing your own waste is really important in your everyday life. And then taking it a step further and getting more involved with groups like Surfrider Foundation or other advocacy groups who are trying to push legislation for bills like reusable bag bills. or back ban bills, excuse me, which we just passed actually this year in Washington State, which is great, but we've been delayed in celebrating the victory due to COVID, unfortunately. But yeah, I think really taking it a step further and trying to get more involved in those local policy changes really makes a significant difference.
Fantastic, James. And thank you so much for your presentation.